welcome back to another creative process video. And this one I'm going to go back to plugins and have a look at a synthesizer which I've been using for a number of years now. So the plugin I'm going to look at today is called Ivor by ZenArts. It's analog modeling, or at least it's based on subtractive synthesis. It's quite a complicated little device. It doesn't look particularly fancy, and sound-wise, in terms of modeling actual analog circuitry, I suspect you can do a lot better. But it does have a lot of interesting features, and one of them is that it allows you to set up alternative keyboard tunings. This is actually reasonably rare. It's becoming more common, but it was certainly very rare when I was looking into microtonal tunings at some of the experiments I was doing a few years back. So I'm going to get straight into that and just run through the features in the device itself. You have oscillator A and oscillator B, and then you have these various modulation sources which affect both of them, and as you can see there is rather a lot to look at. It tends to be the case that for each modulation function there's an LFO, so for instance just for pulse width modulation there's an LFO, but there's a separate LFO in the performance section to control vibrato, and similarly there's an LFO for the filter. There isn't one for the VCA, so tremolo isn't an option on this particular synth. And then we have the ring modulator and a mixer, so you can have a mixed A, B and ring modulated output. You have a saturation section which is built into the filter, and then within the filters, well yes exactly, filters, there are two of them, and you can cascade them or you can run them in parallel. And again you've got an envelope shaper, LFO, and this rate sequencer, which is interesting. I've not played around with this. It should affect the speed of the LFO depending on where you are in the sequence. This envelope generator, as you would expect, and then some effects. Now I don't remember seeing the effects actually, so maybe I need to have a closer look at that one. Okay, I'm going to start by looking at the microtonal features. I think this is something that is perhaps the most different thing about this synth. Essentially, this is an analog synth. If you're familiar with that, you're going to be able to work out how to program it. And in case you're not, then what you need to do is have a look at the manual, which is, as I've already said, very comprehensive. And that is going to explain really everything you need to know about this synth. Now I'm going to look at the programming side of it as well. That is coming up. But the main thing that you should really take away from this is the microtonal side. So having a look at that, this is where you do the changing. Now there's a lot to be said about creating microtonal scales, but what's quite useful about this program is that it comes with lots of microtonal scales built in. So if we go here, and you can see it's set to local at the moment, so I'm guessing there's a folder somewhere which has all of these in. Now see, 12 tet is 12 divisions of the octave, so this is our standard scale. This is the one you're going to be familiar with. Now if I go here, you'll see there are many other options here. Let's go for something, let's see, something that's going to sound quite different maybe. I don't really know. Let's go 15. Okay, so let's quickly try that on the keyboard and see how that sounds. Okay, so that's the sound that I programmed recently, and so that is the actual sound of the Ivor synth. And then this is the alternative scale. That may or may not be something you can work with. Let's try 7 divisions. Now, I'm only playing white notes on that one. Again, it's something you can work with. I think a lot of these things sound quite good if you use a sort of percussive sound with it as well. And I think one last example I will go for on this one. Now, if I change this to global, it's actually takes me to this particular folder simply because that's where I navigated to earlier. And these are some of the scales I made myself for my own particular uses. Something a bit more familiar there. Just a clear thing to do. But I changed some of the thirds to get a different effect. Something a bit more Middle Eastern. I don't think that was intentional, but that seems to have been what I've ended up with. That sounds quite interesting. So that's the main thing about the microtonal side of things. You don't program the scales themselves within the synthesizer. You have to use a program called Scala to do that, and really that's quite a big subject, so I think probably something that needs to be saved for another video. When you start off a new sound then, or you basically have a whole load of patches up here. These are the default patches, and then the ones I've been doing myself up here, and we're on that one. So I'm just going to rename it and save it for now. So let's again go for that. I think the best place to start, as you normally would, is the oscillator. Now, before I go here, if we go over here to the oscillator mixer, you can see that we have oscillator A, oscillator B, and a ring modulation option, and we also have all of these faders so that we can mix the signal. So at the moment it's just oscillator A, so that's what I'm going to concentrate on, and then I'll add the second oscillator later on. Now, sine. Okay, let's actually get something which has got some harmonics. Let's go for saw and then see what that one sounds like. Okay, it doesn't sound like a saw. Now, the reason for that is because it has this additive synthesis feature. Now, you can choose the number of harmonics that you want added to your saw wave. And so if we go up to 256, you've actually now got something that sounds a bit more like a sawtooth. And if I go down to 18, still sounds pretty much like a sawtooth. If I go down to 4, it doesn't sound like a sine, but it doesn't really sound like a sawtooth either. 8 is a bit better. 16 is quite bright. And it's very interesting, it doesn't sound that much different between the 16 and 256. Now, we've got the option to transpose in cents. 1200 cents is an octave. So if I go up 1, then it goes up an octave. 2 octaves, 3 octaves. Now we also have another way to transpose, and we go like this. Now this is going to be frequency ratios. So if I am here, then that frequency ratio is 1, so no change. 2, so that's twice the frequency. 3 is 3 times the frequency. 4 times the frequency. You get the idea. Now, if I do it subharmonic, it works in a different way. So 1 is where we start. If I go to 2, it's half the frequency. It's a third of the frequency. It's a quarter of the frequency. Fifth of the frequency. So it works in the other direction, getting smaller by fractions. That's probably the easiest way to think of it. Now I'm going to introduce the other oscillator. What I want to do here then is just change the detune a little bit. Let's try and get a bit of richness into the sound. So the best way to do that would be then, because we only want the frequency to be slightly different. So if I put, say, 2 cents here, bear in mind a cent is 100th of a semitone, and also 2 cents here, what I'll do is I'm going to transpose that one up 1 of this. So that's up 2 cents. I'm going to transpose this one down. So -1 of these. So that's -2 cents. So let's see if we can hear that. I've done it right. Yeah, that's better. Okay, so it's a bit more of an interesting waveform there. Now the other thing that we can do is we have an LFO here, and this changes pulse width modulation. Now this is particularly useful on this synth because all of these that say pulse have some kind of dynamic variation. So I'm going to go for pulse saw on that one as well. So LFO frequency, that's very low, isn't it really? Why don't we put it on 0.5? I'm going to put that onto sine. So we're going to put it on. So that's a BPM multiplier. This is one of the things that's slightly confusing about these. Some of these switches toggle. So the fact that that says sync LFO means that it is actually synchronized. Not that if you click this, it will become synchronized. And that's not very clear from the button. So that's something you've got to look out for. So now it says frequency LFO, then it should be independent of the beat. Which should mean that doesn't do anything. It doesn't seem to do anything. There we go, so we can definitely hear something now. But I wanted a sort of slow, phasey sound, so let's say 0.7. Okay, it still sounds a bit fast. Let's go to say 0.3. Better. Now the other thing that's worth thinking about on this one is that there's this modulation button here, and if it's got the double chevron like this, it means that both oscillators are being modulated in a, shall we say, positive way, i.e. the slope of the LFO, when it's positive for both. Now if I do this, what it does is it inverts that LFO for one of the oscillators. We go up here, this is also an interesting thing. We have a separate LFO for vibrato. I mean, why not? So I'm going to put the vibrato on. And put the vibrato frequency. Unfortunately, it will only go down to 1. It'd be really nice if you could take that down to 0.1 or something. Okay, so we're getting a good phasey sound there. Now we've got the LFO, so let's now the PMD. Yes, this is. I'll turn it on. So what it'll do is it will subtly detune the oscillators on each key, so to emulate a sort of instability and lack of tuning on the oscillators. So older analog synthesizers will drift. They're not always perfectly in tune, but it does give them a certain quality which is hard to beat. If I put the depth up, maybe we can hear that better. Yeah, I think you can definitely hear it better. Yeah, listen to that, my God. Okay, maybe that's too much. Yeah, it's really good. Now, let's ring modulation. Yeah, there's a lot we could go into here, and we can just very briefly turn this on. It's because the frequencies are so close to each other. When you ring modulate them, you get to hear all the sort of phasing differences more than anything else. There's some real possibilities there. These strange rhythmic artifacts. It's interesting, but I don't have time to spend doing that, so I'm going to put it back the way it was. Sorry. Okay, let's have a quick look at the filters. I think the main thing here is that we have, it's not just a filter, you've also got a saturation section, so you theoretically get something that's quite dirty. No, I don't think we'll bypass it. We want saturation and filters. Let's put it on 4-pole. Saturation types, yeah, I think there's more to be looked into on that one, no doubt about it. Yeah, okay. Interesting sounds there. So I think what I want to do really is just go for the envelope generator on this one, just to try and, in fact that one's already good, but oh, it's off. I'm going to go also for a little bit more on the think the resonance is quite good on this. I mean, it's not analog, but it's really not bad. I mean, let's have a quick look at the filter modulation. So we've seen the envelope generator. There's nothing special going on here particularly. Polarity, then I guess you can change the way that it affects that, whether the envelope is going down or going up. That's fairly clear. There's quite a lot of things you can do in terms of the curve. So linear certainly is going to be the standard one, but then you've got all these different curve types that you could use. Inverse exponential, what's that sound like? It's going to be relatively subtle, and depending on what sort of sound you're trying to get, it could make a big difference, but a lot of the time it's not. But great set of options there to look at. And you get the same thing reproduced here in the VCA. Right, so again, so standard ADSR, and you've got a level control. Also, you've got this mode. So at the moment, again, it says velocity there, so it means that it's velocity sensitive. Okay, turn it off. And it's not velocity sensitive. Simple as that. So I think that's the basics covered there. Yeah, so hopefully that was interesting. I think the microtonal features are particularly useful if you're on a budget. Most of the other microtonal devices that I've got at the moment, both in terms of plugins and even a bit of hardware now, obviously come with a price tag. So if you're on a very low budget and you want to experiment with microtonality, then this is a really good place to start. Also, the way the oscillator is set up it's quite a unique view. It's very mathematical, and it really appeal to people that have that particular mindset. But it could be a complete mystery to someone else, so that might be a bit off-putting. But having said all that, it's really refreshing to see that different way of doing things. There's plenty of features, using a sequencer as a modulation source. There's all kinds of interesting stuff in there. And even if it's not the most analog sounding plugin you're ever going to find, the fact it's free, it means that you should at least check it out. The manual is also really comprehensive, so if there's anything that just doesn't make any sense, a quick look in there really helps. So that's it for now. I'd be interested to know what you think about it, if you've tried it, and what you think about the videos in general. If you'd like to leave something in the comments, then that would really be helpful for me. And if you enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more, then please leave a like, please subscribe and hit notifications so that you can see when I release the next one. So thanks again for watching. See you on the next one, hopefully. Bye.